Hi, friends. What's up? Welcome. I just decided to put on a hoodie because it's cold. It's November and I am chilly, even though I live in Los Angeles. Hi, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Let's throw in a check-in question into the chat box. What shall our check-in question be? Check-in question will be there's kind of like a way that well, actually, you know what? Ashley's going to throw up a quick poll just to like find out how familiar you are with CEG and like, college essay guy in general. If people are like, what is CEG? That's part of the poll. Um, let's do another checking question besides that. The checking question will be something like, it's something like, it seems to me that this is a really awesome time. You know what? I'm just going to go straight up celebration. What's worth celebrating in your life right now? Let's just get some positive energy going. I was trying to do it like related to this sort of time in college admissions, but let's just keep it more open ended. Hi, Christabel from Ghana. What up? Welcome. Hi, Rachel from the desert. We got folks coming in from Bangladesh. That's awesome. What's great about your life right now? Let me know in the chat. I'd be super jazzed to hear. We got Abu Dhabi in the house. Let's see. We've got, is the poll happening? I think it's happening. Michigan State's victory over Michigan. That's awesome. We've passed November 1st. Indeed, Norma. I'm wiggle fingers to that. When I do wiggle fingers or if I do snaps, it's like, yes, I'm totally feeling what you're saying. Being alive, good health, a roaring fire in your fireplace. That's amazing. Hello to Adeline in London. New goals, early action done. I know that. I knew I'd get some of those in here. Congrats. New puppies. This is lovely. You submitted a college application. That's great. Those winter drinks at Starbucks. I only know about like, what is it? Pumpkin spice. What are the other? Can you regale us, Christina, with what those other ones are? Because I don't know it. I don't think I know a ton of them. Oh, nice. More folks submitting applications. Well, hi, and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be talking, it's going to be, as usual, fast and furious, and there are, as usual, is going to be time for questions at the end. But I'm hoping that some of this will give you either some confidence of like, hey, I did a pretty good job on my early applications, or some new context and some new ideas about how you could potentially up-level the applications that you've submitted. And we're going to cover a wide range of things. So as noted on the thing that you signed up for, today we're going to talk about I have to read these 5 ways to start your college essay, which is like getting into openings, hooks, that kind of thing. We're going to talk about 4 ways to know if your essay is doing its job. And you're like, great, Ethan, where were you like a week ago? Well, I was helping students as they were trying to figure out if their essay was doing its job. 3 tips on, we're going to talk about the why us briefly, the extracurricular activity essay, and the why major essay. I'm going to talk to you about 2 ways to improve the structure or the flow of your personal statement. And what does that even mean when we're talking about? I think you know what it means, but we're going to talk about what that means. And then I'm going to go through an awesome application from a student from last year that I worked with. Jacqueline, shout out, who's at college now, and I'm excited for her. So here, and there's no PowerPoint today. Like who has time to make PowerPoints? Life is, I don't want to be spending my whole life making PowerPoints. And the reason I say that is like, we come up with these webinars sometimes, within a week or so or 2. And then it's like, oh yeah, I could totally talk about that, but I just don't have time to make PowerPoints. So here goes 5 ways to start your college essay. First of all, before I get into this, let me talk about some ways that I wouldn't recommend starting your college essay. So, well, by the way, let me see how familiar folks are with College Essay Guy. So barely heard of you. Okay, it's pretty evenly split, actually. Okay, cool. So great, good to know. So some ways that I wouldn't recommend starting is with sentences like students will say things like throughout history, da, 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 da. And if you find yourself trying to make some big, grand, like ambiguous statement that is pretty abstract, when I'm trying to like get a sense of you, if we can start with something more particular, something smaller, that's what tends to, me personally, grab me. So I wouldn't start with like large ambiguous statements like many great thinkers have existed in our nation's history. It's like, what? Where are we? What's happening? And I wouldn't necessarily start with like the meta, like it's the night before the deadline and I'm sitting here trying to write my college essay. Like, I know that's tempting to do it, but those essays tend to be like bad, 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 and then like really good. And if you want to see like a really good example of a movie that is really good with the meta, check out the film Adaptation. Or you can also check out the script Synecdoche, New York, which is also a movie. But Charlie Kaufman is really good at the meta. What's the other one? Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Like really good. But there's so many movies that have tried to go meta that have been bad. I wouldn't recommend starting with a quote, like in the words of Mahatma Gandhi, you know, especially if it's a familiar quote. And I wouldn't recommend necessarily starting with something that's like spoils the ending of your essay, where you basically say what's going to come in your essay. Like, for example, if you say at the beginning of your essay, like, I've wanted to be a doctor for as long as I can remember. And, you know, and this is why. And then you just kind of like walk through like all the things. It's like, okay, that's what I knew you were going to say, you know, due to these, you know, series of events. It sort of like spoils the ending. So you better, if you're going to start with something that's like somewhat obvious, like what I would call it a kind of a thesis, you're going to want to make sure that at some point in the end, you have something that answers so what, which gives us some kind of new, insightful, we'll get into that more in a little bit, moment that gives us something new, right? So that it's like, tell us why we've been telling you. Because if you say basically, if you start with something like, I want to be a doctor and here's why, then that's kind of like what could have been your ending, you know? So make sure that you've got something at the end that actually surprises us. Okay, but that's enough. I said I was going to give you 5 do's. So what could you do? One way to start your essay is what I call the Hemingway. My younger brother, Nick, coined this. And it's just like a specific detailed description. Like every Saturday morning, I'd awaken to the smell of crushed garlic and piquant pepper. I would stumble into the kitchen to find my grandma squatting over a large silver bowl, mixing fat lips of fresh cabbage with garlic, salt, and red pepper. You got all these details. And you know, that's what's that those details can draw us in. That's something that from your English class is called verisimilitude, right? It's like those specific details that really pull us in and make us curious, like what's going on here? And then I think it's important to then follow it up with, if you're going to use some show there at the start, some kind of tell that gives us a sense of where we are or what are we doing? What's happening here? In this case, the student says, that was how the delectable Korean dish kimchi was born every weekend at my home. And so I'm like, okay, now I'm starting to get some values. So I'm getting tradition, I'm getting family, I'm getting something related to like culture probably. So it's starting to give me some of those college essay, you know, those things that score college essay points, which is like, what are those values that are important to you? So that's one idea. It's just starting with a specific detailed description of something and then following it up with a little so what that tells us what we're looking at. Another one is the twist. So a student that actually I just found out she's been crushing it at Rice. She's graduating this year. She started her essay with saying, growing up, my world was basketball. And she describes summers spent between the 2 solid black lines. You know, wardrobe consisted of track shorts, Nike shoes, and tournament t-shirts. And she goes on to describe like basically basketball was life. But then she says, but that was only me on the surface. Deep down, I was an East Asian influenced bibliophile and a young adult fiction writer. And so I read that and I go, oh, okay, that's interesting. Tell me more, right? So you basically, in this case, this student decided to say, here's who I was on the surface or who people perceive me to be, but there's a deeper truth. There was much more to me than this. And that raises a question. And this is the key through these 5 different openings that I'm going to suggest to you, is that each one of these kind of raises a question. Okay, well, why did you start talking about this? How kimchi was made at your home every morning or every Saturday? Like, what was that about? Well, okay, so you weren't a basketball player. You were actually an East Asian influenced bibliophile. Like, okay, there's like some curiosity. Well, why did people see this to you? Like, what was it like having these conflicting identities? Was that challenging? What was that like for you? Another one is, and this one's tough to pull off, is the philosophical question. This one, the student spent a lot of time working on this one, but his question was, does every life matter? That was what he started his essay with, the question, does every life matter? Because it seems like certain lives matter more than others, especially when it comes to money. What? Tell me more. Where's that going? And basically his essay it raises a question, right? Like, why is he asking, does every life matter? How did he come to this point of view? And basically the essay unravels and lets us know how he came to that perspective and how he sort of wrestled with that. Another idea for an opening is the confession opening. You know, the student who starts their essay, for example, with, I've been pooped on many times. I mean this in the most literal sense possible. I've been pooped on by pigeons and possums, house finches and hawks, egrets and eastern grays. You know, that's the kind of like, okay, interesting, maybe odd, but like, tell me more. So you're trying to raise a question, right? Here's a secret that no one in my family knows. I shot my brother when I was 6. Luckily, it was a BB gun. But to this day, my older brother, Jonathan, doesn't know who shot him. And I've finally promised myself to confess this 11-year-old secret to him after I write this essay. Dun, dun, dun. Tell me more. Where does that go? Again, we're like trying to raise a question at the start. It doesn't have to be like a huge mind-blowing, like big challenges question. It's just something to make us curious, right? This is something, I won't get super into this, but there's a thing in screenwriting called the central question of the film, which is like, what is the thing that we're wondering about from the beginning? Like, will they find Nemo, or will Romeo and Juliet end up together? That's not from the beginning, but from later on. That's kind of what you're trying to do, is figure out at the opening of your essay, what is the small question that you could get the reader curious about answering by the end. So I call that the central question of the essay. Here's one more, the trailer thesis. So you give us kind of like a sneak peek of what's to come. 6 years ago, this student writes, a scrawny 12-year-old kid took his first steps into Home Depot. We can see an image of a scrawny kid walking into Home Depot. The epitome of manliness, he says. As he marched through the wood section, his eyes scrolled past the options. Red oak, no, too ubiquitous. Pine, no, too banal. Mahogany, so he's trying to pick wood. And we also get from his choice of language that this is somebody who cares about details. He says, mahogany, perfect. It would nicely complement his walls. As days went on, the final product was almost ready. 91-degree angles had been perfected to 90, so we can see his meticulousness. Drawer slides had been lubricated 10 times over. Finally, the masterpiece was finished, and the little boy couldn't help but smile. A scrawny 12-year-old kid had become a scrawny 12-year-old man. So we're still wondering, where is this going? Next sentence tells us, this desk I sit at, oh, he made the desk, has not only seen me through the last 6 years, but its story, ooh, the desk has a story, and the story of the objects I keep on it, tell me what objects are on it, provide a foundation for my future pursuits. And this is kind of what I would call like an advent calendar style opening, where you're kind of pinging for us that there are all these little windows that you're going to open for us in the essay. And it's like up to us to like stick around to find out what's going to be behind doors number 2, 3, 4, and 5. So he's kind of like awakening in our mind curiosity about these little paragraphs. In this case, each paragraph is going to connect to a different object and tell us how each one connects, provided a foundation for his future pursuits. Yeah. So hopefully that gives some inspiration, some ideas. And again, just to kind of recap, like what you're trying to do is to raise a question in the mind of the reader. And there's so many ways to do that. Those are 5 different ways to do it. So how do you know if your application, and let's speak about personal statements in particular. How do you know if it's actually doing its job? So in my humble opinion, there are 4 qualities of an outstanding personal statement. And when I, think about all the personal statements that I love, I didn't just like come up with these 4 qualities. I like actually looked back at, okay, like in other words, I didn't just like dream and go like, what does a great personal statement have? I actually looked at essays that were just awesome to me. And I was like, okay, what do these have in common? And for me, the 4 qualities of an outstanding personal statement are, number 1, this is going to be on the test. Number 1, core values. Okay. What do you really care about? Can I look in your essay and like point to specific things, like that student who's like built that thing with his hands? I'm like, core value, working with your hands. Core value, attention to detail. So can I point to core values? And do you have a wide range of values, not just like 1 or 2, like just demonstrating your hard work all the way through? So we have a nice range of some core values that we can clearly point to. Number 2, do we have insight? And what is insight? Insight, I'll give you the simple version, and then I'm going to give you, I'm going to do a version with my hands. So the simple version of insight is like, if you're saying something that's insightful, you're saying something that probably surprises me. Okay. So like if a friend says something and it's like not that surprising, I wouldn't call it insight. If you're standing in front of the Mona Lisa and you're like, wow, this is a pretty good painting. Like that's not an insight, right? It's like, yeah, it's real. It's pretty famous too. Right. So insight, here's the version with my hands, is like, if you imagine that there's like, imagine that like, this is all known knowledge, and like you, and I'll just like speak to like Ashley, who's moderating. Hi, Ashley, today. This is like Ashley's knowledge. Right. And then like, here's Ethan's knowledge right here. And like, there's like, imagine a Venn diagram. So there's the stuff, actually, let's do it this way. So there's the stuff Ashley knows, and there's the stuff Ethan knows. Okay. And some of it overlaps here. Okay. So what I'm interested in, if I'm the admission reader, is what is the stuff that's in your circle? What is the stuff that you know that I don't know, that you have that you've learned based on your experiences, based on your, perception of the world? Or if you're going to talk about something that's in like that, I should probably have had a graph ready for this. If you're going to talk about something that's like in the overlap section, like you're going to want to say it in a way that isn't a way that I've heard recently. Right. So you're going to want to either say something that surprises me in the sense of like, oh, I didn't know that either about you or about the world. Like, oh, sometimes students will teach me things like I'll read an essay and I'm like, oh, I did not know that about the way the brain is built. And that would be like stuff that's in Ashley's circle that's not in my circle. Right. Because I didn't know that thing about the brain. But then for the stuff that, again, we overlap in, it's like, well, what is that? Can you say it in a way that's like, oh, I like the way you said that. That's the phrasing there is somewhat uncommon. Okay, so that's what we're looking for when we're talking about insights. And you can actually, for those of you who've written a draft, go back through your draft and you're going to be like, but wait, I know all of this stuff. Have a friend do this. Be like, do you feel like there are any things in here that either is something that you didn't know or is something that I said about a thing that you do know, but I said it in a way that's kind of cool, right? And by kind of cool, I just mean like in a way that might sound like insight. Because sometimes I read something and I'm like, oh, I knew that, but like the way that person said it is like, yeah, that really landed for me. That's what ends up feeling to me like insight. So that's the second one. The third one is vulnerability. Sometimes I'll read awesome essays and I'll learn so much about the way that student thinks, but then I feel like I'm missing on like something about their personality, or like, sometimes, we'll say to each other, like, I hear what you're saying, but I'm not really like feeling what you're saying. Like, I don't really feel you through this. So this is a really hard thing to quantify. But one thing you can do in kind of like a test for this is you can give your essay to a friend and say, hey, level 1 to 10, what vulnerability level would you say this is at? And if you're feeling vulnerable about doing this, actually give them your rating first. Be like, I think it's level vulnerability 4. What do you think? And see if they read it and agree. And there's not like a perfect level of vulnerability, but I find that the essays that I love do have some what I would call vulnerability. And if it's level 2, like it just doesn't feel vulnerable, like I've really learned something about, and what is vulnerability? Look at Brene Brown's work. Look at her TED Talk on vulnerability. She says a lot about it. It's that quality of, it doesn't have to be like revealing your deepest, darkest secret. There's so many ways of being vulnerable. Part of it is like revealing ways that, things that you feel like might be, stigmatized, but that you have, that you're comfortable sharing and that you feel like you've learned from. But that's also like things that you love geeking out about. I love board games. Like probably, my friends sometimes think I have a problem. And their board games are pretty nerdy. Like, not everybody thinks board games are cool. What's something else that would be like more vulnerable? I mean, I don't know if did you guys want me to just get like super vulnerable? I could just be like, nothing's live for me right now. I do this sometimes in sessions. I'm not feeling it right now. But yeah, vulnerability. Like, is that in your essay or not? And then the fourth one is craft. And by the way, not all of these have to be there in order to have like an outstanding essay. These are just things that I personally like to see. The fourth one is craft. Like, did you clearly spend some time crafting your essay, working on revising it, creating multiple drafts? Or did you just kind of like do it kind of fast and you're like, it's good. I mean, sometimes some people are like amazing writers and can come up with something well crafted in like a first draft. But for most of us, myself included, it takes multiple drafts. So is that clear? Is that evident from your work? If you're trying to think, okay, well, how do I know if these elements are in there? It can be really useful to have a partner that you kind of walk through this with, and you go, okay, part 1, values. Have the person look at it. You can, print it out, hand it to them, or just, share your Google Doc with them and be like, which values do you see coming through super clearly? Which values do you feel like are kind of coming through, but could be coming through more clearly? And which values do you feel like are not there at all? Yeah. And those third ones, I think, are, especially for those of you who've already written a draft, are going to be the most important ones, I think, because oftentimes, we are infinitely complex, and oftentimes we think that some of that complexity is coming through. But when you look at what's actually on the page, like that awesomeness, only some of it's coming through. And it can be really helpful for someone to point out like, oh, only 2 or 3 values are coming through. And it's like, oh, yeah, I could see that I could bring a lot more of myself. Like, somebody who knows you really well might be like, you know what, you're really funny. And I'm just not getting that sense of humor here. Not that you have to make your essay funny, but if that's a big thing to you, bring it in, or leadership. You might be like, I feel like leadership's coming through. And this is what's called a values scan. Do the scan for yourself and go, here are the things that I think are coming through. And does it match up with what I'm trying to communicate to somebody else? Don't give them the one that you've already done, because then you're going to kind of be telling them the answers to the quiz. And then you can do that same thing with insight. Are there 3 or 4 moments where you're saying, where I said something that kind of surprises you? You can do this with a friend. Ideally, you do this with your college counselor, or, someone who has experience reading essays, but you can totally do this with somebody that just, that knows you, or that and then with craft, it's a little bit harder. Craft comes after revisions, after revising, after like actually working on the other 3 things. Vulnerability is kind of the same thing. Like I said, you can hand it to somebody and be like, scale of 1 to 10, how vulnerable do you think this is? Feel free to throw questions in the chat. I'm going to get to them in just a few minutes. I'm going to make sure I get through the rest of the content. All right. My main tip, let's talk about these 3 supplemental essays. So there's the YS essay, the extracurricular activity one, and the Y major. I've got a really long YouTube video on the YS that I released like a month ago. And it's like a 20-minute thing that'll walk you through the YS essay. If you'll throw in the link to that, and folks want to check that out, because there's a whole guide to this. But the very short version of it is, and then my main tip for the YS is that this is a research essay. This is not something that you're going to dream up from your brain. This is actually, I'm going to give you a few tips on this. So this is going to be more like 20 ways to up-level your essay. This is not something that you're going to be able to be like, I've really thought about it. I don't know why I want to go to Yale. It's like, well, how much time have you spent on the Yale website? Like, what courses are you considering? What major, Oh, maybe I can go find out. So go do bunches and bunches and bunches of research. That's the first main thing for the YS. The second thing I would say is, like, if you find you've written a draft, especially for Yale, just to use them as an example, because their YS essay is 125 words. If you find that any sentence in there sounds like it could be written by somebody else, delete it. Because every sentence is an opportunity, especially in these short ones, to stand out. And if the sentence is something that somebody else could have said, then that's a missed opportunity. You're blending in. So delete it. Find something else to say that's more specific. You can almost not get too specific in a YS essay. Okay. The more targeted you can get with unique things that the school provides that connect to your unique interests. And that's like the 4th tip I'll give about the YS, is that oftentimes students say, Yale has this amazing theater program. And it's like, Yale knows it has an awesome theater program. What the heck does that have to do with you? So make sure that this is like the 4th tip, is like anything you say about the school in that same sentence, if possible, connect it back to you. That's like a quick structural thing. The extracurricular activity essay. So I've got a couple different structures that I recommend for this. And I'll tell you more at the end about this course that I'm teaching that's coming up. That's a pay what you can course, as all my courses are. But the main tips I'd give you for the extracurricular activity essay are these 2. Number 1 is, if you are writing about a community service project, which is to say, a fundraiser, something that you're doing to make the world a better place, chances are there's a problem that you were trying to solve. And you can start your extracurricular activity essay with what was the problem you were trying to solve. Now, just because you say what the problem is doesn't mean that we get it. So I would follow that up with telling us why that problem was a big deal, either to you personally or to the world at large. Okay. The 3rd step in this one is, tell us what you did or what your team did to try and solve this problem. It doesn't mean that you actually did solve it, but what did you do to try and tackle this? At least some small, to do something about the problem that you name. Step 4 is, it's really important to highlight your particular contributions. Okay. So, whether it's, I was the finance person who tracked our numbers, or I was the one who was like the cheerleader, or I was the one who was like the team glue, making sure that people were showing up on time. Whatever that is, let us know what your particular role was. Okay. By the way, this works really well for the Michigan essays, which you guys are like, I just submitted that like 5 days ago for the community essay. If you haven't applied and written that one yet, this works for that as well. And then the 5th one is, give us a sense of impact. Like, who did it matter to? What you did, who did it matter to? And how do you know it mattered? Give us specific details. And if you can, give us specific numbers. We raised club membership from X number to X times 2, or we, created a more welcoming and diverse campus. Well, how did you do that? Give us some specifics that would give us evidence that actually happened. I know I'm jamming through these, but this is kind of like a, I was going to say buffet style, but it's not quite that big. It's more like a sampler platter. That's what this is. It's a sampler platter. All right. Why major essay? This is that essay. Oh, wait, sorry. I said I was going to give one more. So on the extracurricular activity, you can do those steps to write. That's if you've got a challenge that you're facing. If you don't have a challenge, you're like, Ethan, that doesn't really apply to me. Then what I would say do is think about what are some values that you've developed through this club or project or whatever it was. And I would say strive for uncommon connections, which is to say, and I've got this values exercise that you can find on my website. You take a look at what are the values that I developed through, for example, let's say volleyball. And the first thing to do is like, don't talk about the typical things that everybody else is going to talk about, which you can probably guess what those are going to be: discipline, hard work, perseverance, teamwork, etc. And you'll want to look at this values list. And actually, let's just do it really quick. Ashley, would you throw in the link to the values exercise, please? I'm just going to share my screen for a second because this is a pretty good exercise. It takes a little bit of time to do this. We're going to kind of do like the 1 minute version, but here we go. There's me. I look like I'm praying there, Ashley. That's kind of a weird one for, I don't know how I feel about that one. All right. Praying on my values. All right. So here is the values exercise. So here's what we're going to do is I want you to imagine for a second that we're brainstorming this volleyball essay. And I want you to think, and this is like, you can throw this into the chat, which I've been ignoring so far, but I'm now paying attention to. What are some values that you wouldn't normally associate with volleyball, but you, who are so wise, could actually see making a connection to volleyball? I'll make this a little bit larger. So just throw it into the chat real quick. Like, whether you play volleyball or not, what are some uncommon connections to volleyball that might surprise us? Can you think of any? Take a look at this list. Volleyball has taught me more about blank. Like, what is the thing that you could potentially bring in? I'm going to make this even larger. There we go. Any ideas? And now that I've been like talking and moving around, I'm like warm enough to take off my hoodie. Thoughts? Jump in here. Courage. Ooh, how has volleyball taught you about courage? That's kind of a cool one. Order. I'm interested in that. Healthy boundaries. I'm interested in that. And now I wish we were in person, because then I'd be like, tell me more about Noor, how volleyball has taught you about objectivity. Because I would so much rather read an essay that's about how volleyball has taught me about, let's see, I'm just going to grab a few of these: accountability and self-love and freedom, than discipline, hard work, and perseverance. Like, each one of those paragraphs that's going to be on those different values is going to be so much more interesting than an essay that's going to be small can be mighty. Yes. Then is going to be that essay that's like, oh, everybody else has read this. So the key to this, what I'm trying to get y'all to do, is to develop better ingredients for your extracurricular activity essay, especially if it's a common activity. Brainstorm the common values, delete them in your mind, and then go, yes, Priscilla, what has volleyball taught you about trust? Second chances. Yes, humor. This is great. So you can apply this. And the more common, I would say, the more common your topic is, the more important these uncommon connections are if you want to stand out. Because guess how many volleyball essays they're reading this year? A bunch. And you've got to, like, if you are writing about, I'm picking on volleyball, but if you're writing about a common sport, it's going to have to be like the best essay on this sport in order to stand out. And one of the ways you can stand out is through this uncommon connections exercise. So that's the very short version of it. But it's a really good way to help, think about better ingredients, better pizza. No, better essays. It's true. But, it's better ingredients. That's what's going to create better ingredients. It's like, what are those uncommon values? Uncommon connections. Okay. Let's talk briefly about the why major essay. So your why major essay is your, why do you want to study the thing you want to study? And if you're one of those students who wrote that essay already for your personal statement, and then you found when you were writing the supplements that, like, oh my gosh, who was it? This happened to somebody, I'm sure, on this call right now, that you're like realizing that you have to write that why major essay, and you'd already written it for your personal statement. And so you probably were like, okay, I got to make a choice. I either have to get creative and say some different stuff, or I have to write a different personal statement for this school. And I'm curious to know what folks chose if they found themselves in that situation. But with the why major essay, the main thing is, like, I kind of want you to imagine a little montage, a little montage of you going through the moments that led you to this particular moment of yeah, that's why I want to study neuroscience. And a thing that I'm going to suggest that I haven't actually said live on a webinar before is I'm going to suggest that you cut your first paragraph, because I've read so many essays, especially like in the last year or two, and maybe it's because this is the way my guide says it, of like what I would call like the I was a baby genius opening, where it's like, when I was 7 years old, I was, doing trinomials or, just like, really specific geeky stuff. And the students emphasizing what a baby genius they were. And I just think that like, great, but it's so common. I would say move into like stuff that happened a little bit later on. So maybe start in middle school, so that with something a little bit more advanced. Okay, Clarice is in that situation. Yeah. Like, is there something that you could think of? Like, first of all, do the whole like, mini movie, like montage of like, what are all those different things that have led you to be interested in whatever it is, neuroscience or, being an awesome chef. And then think about, okay, which of these could I potentially combine, depending on how your word limit is, which of these could I potentially combine and mention just briefly? Because I want you to get into like higher level language pretty soon at some point in the Y major essay. So if it's like, Columbia's got one that's like, sorry, counselors, I know I'm mentioning a lot of highly selectives, but they have lots of supplements. A school like Columbia has a Y major essay that's 200 words. And they're like, why do you want to study what you want to study, basically? I think it's a good idea to get into some of the, higher level advanced stuff that you've been doing sooner in the essay if you can. Okay. So if you want to talk about stuff that you did when you were a baby genius, keep that stuff super short, to demonstrate, hey, I've been interested in this in a long time. Great. But get to the more recent stuff as soon as you can. Okay. Like maybe like a third of the way into the essay, get to the more recent, like high school stuff so that you can kind of expand on that. If you want to expand on like, and here's what I want to do in the future, great. You can keep that part kind of short because it's mostly they're asking in most of these cases, what have you done that's led you to this interest? Allegra's agreeing with me. The second paragraph is almost always better. What if we've not decided what to major in? Priscilla, that's a great question. Pick 2 or 3 areas of interest. I would say 2. Like, here are 2 things that I'm interested in studying, and focusing on those. Because even though you don't know exactly what you want to major in, I'm sure there's like stuff that you're curious about. So what are the things that you're curious about? Even if you do check undecided for your major. Ooh, and there's some great questions coming in. I'm going to get to them in just a minute here. How do you improve the flow of your personal statement? Okay, so here's a thought. And I haven't said this live on a webinar, I don't think either. I think I said it in a course. When you're trying to establish for your reader the structure of your essay, I feel like you've got 2 ways to do it. One is you can do it at the very beginning of your essay. You can basically be like, I'll use an example of a student who wrote about animals. And he gives this example of all these animals that he raised, that he grew up with. And then at the end of his opening paragraph, he basically says, why am I talking about these animals? This is the gist of it. This isn't literally the words he used, but he's like, each one of these has shaped me in an important way. And that's the first way to set us, it's called a launch line, to let us know where the essay's headed. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to build trust with the reader. Okay. So if you're the writer, you're trying to let the reader know, hey, we're going on a journey, and it's going to be a journey that's going to be about how animals have shaped my life. And I just let you know at the end of my first paragraph. And that's the launch line. It's not a thesis necessarily, because I didn't say, maybe you could argue that it's a thesis. It's not a very good one if you're just keeping it that short, but it's not very nuanced. Hopefully there's some more insights there at the end, but you're giving us a sense and raising a question of like where the essay's headed. Okay. It's kind of like, well, I'll give the analogy in a second. The second way to do it is at the beginnings, usually, of your paragraphs, which is like your transition. So let's say you do something that's like a little more, I don't want to say creative, but like a little more ambiguous. Like we don't know where the essay's headed at the start. And we're kind of like, okay, this seems to be an essay about like list making. Okay. And the author's talking about list making. And then it seems like the paragraph has shifted now it's not about list making. It's about like other things that the author writes. Okay, cool. It's about writing. And then in the third paragraph, it seems to not just be about writing, but about capturing ideas. Oh, so list making and writing are about capturing ideas. So there's this larger theme of capturing ideas, and I can see how those are connected. A really good place to connect those ideas, I know this is going to sound super basic, but is in your topic sentences. And it's kind of like, if imagine that we were going on a walk and I'm like, hey, let's go for a walk. And you're like, okay, I'm down. I could do version 1 and be like, if you ask me, where are we going? Because that's kind of the question in the reader's mind. Like, where are you taking me? I could be like, version 1, animals essay. Hey, we're going to hike to the top of that hill. You go, okay, cool. I'm down. And we go. Version 2 is you go, hey, where are we going? And I'm like, I'm not going to tell you right away, but just walk with me to the end of this street. And then I'll tell you where we're going to go next. And so walking with me to the end of the street is kind of like reading the first paragraph. And then once we get to the end of that street where we said we were going to go, I go, now we're going to take a right. And we're going to talk about the power of language in writing in other ways in my life. Okay, boom, 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 boom. And eventually we're going to end up at the top of the hill or wherever we end up. But essentially you're creating signposts, right, for the reader along the way. And the most, I think, a really good place to put those, why? Because readers are often skimming, is to put them at the top, at those, those topic sentences, the beginnings of your paragraphs. Now, if you're like, okay, well, how do I check to see if my essay is flowing or not? Just highlight those first sentences in bold and read them aloud to yourself. Oftentimes in a well-structured essay, they're going to kind of read like a short version of the essay. Now, I would actually suggest, if it's not working, to like also highlight the last sentences, because sometimes those last sentences of each paragraph can be nice places for signposts. If you're worried that the reader is like missing a particular signpost, just put it on a separate line by itself. If you're like, if they miss this, they're gonna be totally lost in my essay. And if it's buried in the middle of a paragraph, then potentially just restructure it so that that's like on a sentence by itself, on a line by itself. So the reader's skimming and they're like, oh, it's something about animals shaping my life. Okay, great. That's what this essay is about. If I buried that in the middle of the paragraph and they're skimming and they missed it, they'd be like, what is all this animal stuff? So anyway, 2 thoughts on that. Let's look very briefly. And I want to do like a 5-minute scan of this. This was a student from last year named Jacqueline, who I'm so proud of. She's a star. I talked about her briefly on another webinar. Didn't mean to rhyme. But let's just look. I want to look briefly at her application. She wrote about, some challenges that she'd experienced growing up. She is a first-gen student. She's from Tucson, just an amazing human. I'm not going to read her whole essay right here, but basically she talked about the challenges she experienced, what she did about it, and what she learned through the experience, how it led to her becoming an activist. And then in her activities list, you'll notice this. This is something else we'll talk about in the course a little bit, is like, it's so important. I'm not going to get into this today, but it's so important to make sure you've got really strong active verbs in your activities list. Like, she highlighted them in bold. Just, I don't know, maybe I highlighted these at some point, but like she, through this mentorship, she guides mentees academically, provides unconditional support, facilitates structure to help change the trajectory of their lives. And sometimes she simply roots for them. So there's some really lovely verbs in here. And as I scan this, again, the reader who's skimming can sort of see, oh, wow. So the increasing access, coaching peers. Okay, cool. And I can see those things, like the verbs can really help the thing pop. This was definitely not her first draft. This was like, 4 or 5 drafts where she like revised. I mean, maybe it was 3, but I think it's really important. I was just talking, actually, this was in the Facebook forum of a group of counselors. I've got 3,000 counselors that we geek out on college essays on Facebook. I know that's super old of me, but one counselor who's just started reading for university applications was like, hey, I think the activities list is really important and students are not paying attention to it. So just a shout out for the activities list. For COVID, I've got a few different things to say about this, but if you feel like it's impacted you, like, again, same structure that I just suggested, challenges and effects, what I did about it and what I learned. This student structures it that way. Here are the challenges. Specifically, her older sister worked at McDonald's, so we feared she'd lose her job or infect my abuelita, who was 78. But what did she do about it? Mental health became a priority. We got loaner laptops, so she didn't have access to, online learning was really tough for her. So, she was able to organize her time differently. And she also got involved in a couple different clubs, different activities. It's okay to weave some of those things in. And if you were somebody who's like, it kind of impacted me, but mostly there were like lots of positive things, you can focus on 2 or 3 positive things that came out of it and just do like a little short few sentences on each one. Because colleges want to know, what have you been up to for the past 2 years? Additional info is another one of those really, I think, underused sections, especially for students who've had extenuating circumstances. An example of this, for example, this student who, when she got into high school, she wasn't encouraged to take AP classes. And so when she found out she could, she advocated to the teacher, joined the course semester late, caught up, and became one of the first freshmen to pass an AP exam at her school. Amazing. Now, that might be in the counselor letter, but who knows, so you got to advocate for yourself. And she does a really nice job here of including some great details. She expands on a couple of these things, like the Southern Arizona Ivy League project, where she was part of a select few from Southern Tucson to visit Ivy League schools and selected institutions on the East Coast. Really lovely. And she, there was an internship that she was part of, and she expands on it just a little bit. I don't want y'all to feel like you have to use this section. You totally don't. But if you have extra things to share, that you feel like will give more context, like, hey, in AP stats, here's that we, since AP Stats was cut senior year, I advocated my counselor and I'm self-studying the course. So these things that might not otherwise come out elsewhere in your application, this is the place to put that stuff. For supplements, I want to read you like two of these because they're really lovely ones. This one, the what inspires you, inspires me. So look at what inspires her. My abuelo's naturalization documents, the smell of petrichor, the feeling of placidity after meditating, seeing a sparkle in someone's eyes when they speak about something they genuinely love. Like, so awesome. I love this too. You're teaching a Yale course. What's it called? The Red Stain Across History, a historical look at the taboos, magical theories, and gender stereotypes surrounding menstruation. Even the structure of that, like you're still kind of wondering what she's talking about until menstruation comes at like the end of the title, which is just beautifully crafted. And I want to read one more from you because this is kind of an uncommon extracurricular activity, but when I read it, I was like, send this to as many schools as possible. So this is reflect on your engagement with the community to which you belong. How has this engagement affected you? The smell of barbecue floods my senses as I rush to the end of the hallway, clearing my throat and mind. I pass through the crowd of diners as they're serenaded by muffled blows of trumpets and the strokes of violins. So this is again that Hemingway style, give us specific details to draw us in. And notice that she's awakening all five senses here. So right, not all five, but like the smell of barbecue, and clearing her thought and mind. You hear the sound of trumpets and violins. Mariachi Los Changuitos Feos rehearses in the back of Brother John's, a barbecue restaurant that devotes its business to mariachi. I play the violin, an instrument that I've had by my side since the first grade. We work on a potpourri for the Tucson International Mariachi Conference, a mashup of songs that encompasses various aspects of our heritage. The music goes beyond sharp accents, long vibratos, and rhythmic groove. On a practical level, violin has given me the muscle memory to not only recall the classic version of Las Mañanitas, but also a way to communicate with the deaf community in Tucson through American Sign Language. Uncommon connection. I didn't expect you to say that in basically a violin essay. While being connected to my heritage and abuelos, I gain a superpower. What is it? The ability to manipulate the energy surrounding me as I evoke emotion from the audience and even myself. With every caballito sprouts a new sensation, the feeling of unity and the colors of Mexican culture. Not only do we keep Mexican tradition alive, we plant smiles and energy into our community. The sun goes down as sweat curves on my shoulder, rest, and my fingertips become bruised. Tomorrow we perform at Mass, where I can spread the sensation to a whole audience, keeping mariachi music and my own soul alive. Yes! My own soul is like so alive. I wish Jacqueline was here to just like celebrate her. But thank you, Jacqueline, for writing this amazing essay. And I was like, send it to as many schools as you can. And she did. So that's just like a quick look at an awesome application. We're going to have more time to like dive into specifics of applications on the course. Let me just tell you really quick what this course is. It's coming up. The first thing that you should know about it is that it's pay what you can. Let me just show you where I'm finding this information, by the way. So if you just go to collegeessayguy.com and you just click on the banner at the top of the page, you'll see this thing that's like how to write a personal statement. You can sign up. Again, it's pay what you can, which means you can literally pay whatever you want. There's no barrier. There's no financial barrier to joining. And what we're going to do, this is like, it's starting in 9 days. The cool thing about this though, is that as soon as you sign up, you get all the materials. So you can start writing today. But let me just walk you through this. Week 1, we're going to be talking about brainstorming. You might be like, Ethan, why am I going to talk about brainstorming? I've got an awesome essay that I love. Cool. Why am I going to take you through brainstorming anyway? Because I feel like sometimes you generate stuff when you just take a fresh perspective and thinking about what are the sides of yourself that you want to bring in the personal statement that might surprise you. And it might bring you some really important elements to up-level your essay, or you might get inspired and be like, you know what? I've got this whole other awesome idea for my personal statement now. And you'll have, because we're doing it early enough, if you're applying for a regular decision, you'll have enough time to revise it. And then we're going to talk about outlining and writing. We'll do revising, refining. Like each week, I'm going to be reviewing live, like your essays, not everybody's essays, but reviewing essays live and kind of walking through some awesome things. There's lots more on the course on like specifics. It's basically going to answer pretty much any question you have about a personal statement. And it'll give you a ton of ideas. And then part 2 of this course, which is happening at the same time. It's basically like Saturday mornings, we do personal statement. And then in the afternoons, we do basically the rest of the application. So I'm going to talk to you about making sure that your big picture is like the things that you want to communicate in your application. And then I'm going to get into the specific details of the activities list. Like besides those awesome verbs, how do you up level it so that it shows all the awesomeness of who you are? There are like 10 things that could go in the additional info section. Again, I don't want you to obsess over that, but I'll go through a bunch of examples of that. And you'll ask me a million questions and I'll tell you all, yes, that should go in the additional info, or maybe that goes in the activities list, and we'll talk through that. And then there's a really comprehensive guide to the YS essay, the extracurricular, a bunch more supplemental essays. We basically got guides to all of the supplemental essays you're going to write. And then how do you know in the end, like, how do you feel confident at the end that like your application is really revealing the parts of you? And this is useful for, I mean, if you're here, it's because you either, are open to new ideas, or you're like just getting started, or you're feeling like, okay, so whether you're just getting started or you feel like, okay, I've got something that I like pretty well, but I'm open to new ideas. I'm going to be talking to, I imagine it's going to be like 50-50. Actually, I imagine there are probably going to be more students on the course who've done a lot of stuff and who are looking for like fresh perspective. And so, we'll find out day one. So anyway, I think Ashley will throw in the link to that if you want. These are courses for students. Counselors, hang tight. In January, we're going to launch all of our counselor courses, and I'm going to take you through a whole sequence from basically January, February, March, April, May. I do a whole sequence of courses for counselors that are all like build on each other, and that'll be for you. And some of those are pay what you can. So cool. Let's do questions. Let's see what we've got. Okay. Addams Family is in my head like maybe 10% of the time when a song is in my head, it's the Addams Family. Can we change our early action personal statement after submission in the Common App? You can. Good news. Double check me on this. Counselors, you can let me know. But every other year, and I'm pretty sure it's true now, you can submit your application, your personal statement. And then once you've submitted it, you can go back and edit. And you can Google this just to make sure. Or the Common App actually has really good customer support that you can find out. But yes, you can. What's the opinion on using profanity, specifically quoting someone else? Maybe. It depends on the word, I think, honestly. Is it possible for every student to write this way? I'm not sure what that's related to write which way. I'm going to have to pick and choose through these questions. I don't know when people say pick and choose, because like, what's the difference between picking and choosing? I'm going to have to be selective with these questions. Let's see. What advice do you have for us to figure out, brainstorm what our core values are? For some reason, I have a hard time narrowing down. My advice, Sydney, would be to like sign up for this Pay What You Can course that I have, because I'm going to walk you through the whole dang thing. Yeah, that's my advice. Like there's a 25-minute video that's going to like basically by the end of it, you're going to have, yes, your core values figured out, but beyond that, you're going to have like, hopefully like up to 7 different ideas for your personal statement. So that's my advice. I walk through those exercises sometimes on webinars, and I just didn't happen to cover them today, but that's all at the start of the course. I'm not trying to sell you all the courses. That's like my main purpose for being here, but that definitely was the first thing that came to mind, was like, maybe you should look at the first module, because that's got all the things. If you want a better answer, Sydney, I'll give you a better answer. Who should you give your essays to revise? Parents, peers, English teacher, college counselors? I would go in reverse order. So I would go like, so what you said, Spurthy, I would go college counselor first, because they've got the most information on you, on college, what colleges are looking for. Not you like as a human, but like on what you are bringing to a college. Actually, you know what? That may not be true. The reason I would say go to your college counselor first, though, is they will have the best sense of what colleges are looking for. And then English teacher next, probably, because they're going to help you with all the writing things. And then peers and parents, I kind of would put together. All of those people could be awesome, but just, you want to make sure that they're equipped with like, what are colleges looking for? That's like the main thing. And then what goes into a great essay? Some of the 4 things that I talked about are going to be good things to look for. If you're truly vulnerable, you may be uncomfortable having an editor or friend read your draft. Suggestions? Tweak it for them, or don't have that person read it. Like have someone else read it. When does an essay become too personal? When you sense that you're trying to like use details to make the reader either feel sorry for you or shock them, and you got to be really honest with yourself on that front. And I don't know where you stand with that, but I think it's really important to be honest when you're trying to do that, because colleges, like when we're talking about like hugely stigmatized things, colleges care about your challenges in so much as they were set up for what you did and what you learned through the experience. Yeah. Susan's asking about the Georgetown prompt. Do you have any insight into how to approach the what does it mean to be educated essay? So Susan, I don't know if you're a student or parent, but I would say for Georgetown, because that's the prompt, it's mostly a why us essay. So I would say have the student, or if you are the student, like go in and research Georgetown like crazy and figure out what are all those elements that are going to be the things that really connect you to Georgetown. And then you'll start to like derive, oh yeah, there are these awesome things like being able to interact. I mean, the cheesy one is like hands-on opportunities to like really get involved in X, Y, and Z. But yeah, that's going to be an important part of your education. So for me, being educated means having the opportunity to practically apply the things that I'm learning in class, like practically apply theories. So to me, being educated means this. And oh, by the way, Georgetown has this cool way of doing that, right? You see, so we're kind of reverse engineering it. So go do the research first, find a crap ton of specifics, and then reverse engineer your answers based on that. Same thing applies to CMU. This is, yeah, great. Is it bad to make multiple essays? I'm not sure what you mean. Or how should you pick the topic before writing? Oh, Kensington, I can't answer that in 5 minutes. There's so many different things, but I would say broadly speaking, how do you pick your topic? Imagine that your topic is a keyhole or a lens into looking at you, and you want one that's big enough to talk about a relatively wide range of values, skills, qualities that you're going to be bringing to the college campus. So if you're trying to pick among 3 or 4 topics, ask yourself, if the purpose of the college essay is to demonstrate the skills, qualities, values, and interests that I'm going to bring with me to a college campus, which topic is going to help me do that best? Okay. And sometimes students are like, they have like the challenges one, and they have more the montage one, which like shows different sides of themselves. Sometimes that challenges one, even though it's like a good story and it's like, wow, you went through some tough stuff, isn't maybe necessarily the best way to demonstrate your skills, qualities, values, and interests. So one of the things that I would say is do awesome brainstorming to figure out what are all those sides of yourself that you want to show, and then go, okay, which topic is going to help me show these different sides of myself? Skimming down. Is the COVID essay mandatory? It's not. It's not. It's a 250 word, insert usually, in the Common App, and you can, if you've got something great, if not, all good. Suggestion for the Y major question when you have a 100 word limit. Okay, you know how I mentioned, tell me what are those different elements that have led you to be interested in the thing you're interested in? Do like a sentence on each, because that's about what you're going to have room for. Okay. Let's see. If we have an extracurricular activity we can elaborate on more, should we add this to the additional info? Maybe, yeah. That's a great place to do it, especially if you feel like, wow, I spent so much time doing mariachi, and to not mention it at all, I need to put in there. Another thing the students do is they pull it out of their activities list and they put it only in their additional info. I've seen students do that. There's not like you must do it this way. Certain counselors have really strong preferences. Like you can't put something, in both, or you must put it in your activities list. But I think the overarching rule here is like, as long as it reads clearly, and as long as you're respecting the reader's time with valuable information in the additional info section. I didn't complete the additional section for my EA submission. Should I complete it for my later regular decision applications? I have no idea, because I have no idea about you or about what you might include there. If you feel like there was information missing, like when you look at, an exercise that I love is called the Everything I Want Colleges to Know About Me list. If you do the Everything I Want, and you can also find it on YouTube, hit that like button, smash that subscribe button. No, if you feel like you do the Everything I Want Colleges to Know About Me list, it takes you like 15, 20 minutes. Try and do it and not think about your application, and then take that exercise if you've never done it before, and then compare it to your application and go, are all of these awesome things that I want colleges to know about me coming through my application? If so, score, congratulations, pat yourself on the back. But if not, then you go, okay, well, is there stuff that I might want to add in it doesn't just have to be your additional info. It could be tweaking your personal statement. It could be supplemental essays, and it's going to vary per school, right? Because some schools are going to have awesome supplements like Stanford, and you can just go like, here are all the sides of me in all of these essays. And some of them are going to be like Northeastern, and you're going to be like, y'all really don't want to supplement? Like for real? Okay, maybe more additional info. And you can, change it per school if you want. Is it too early to write essays? And if you're a junior, I mean, Kensington, if you're feeling the vibe right now and you feel like you're like the kind of person who's like writing about myself feels like a fun and interesting and good thing to do, then yeah, go for it. But I wouldn't assume, ooh, you know what? Jacqueline, the student who wrote that essay, that was an essay that she did write when she was a junior. She tweaked stuff in the ending because she ended up doing more stuff that she was able to include. But it's not a bad idea if you're committed, if you believe that writing can be important for your personal growth, and then I say yes. But don't feel like, I mean, fast forward to a year from now, imagining Kensington senior year. Hey, that essay that you wrote junior year, you don't have to use it if you want to write something different. Okay. If it's November 4th, let's say fast forward to like 8 months from now, just know that the stuff that you're writing is, I think, good for the soul and, good for like figuring out what you're about, but don't feel like you have to stick to it. I missed the ED deadline because I didn't start writing my essay yet, but I'm trying to catch some ED2 deadlines. Is it good to write my essay in a rush? Come on. You're going to ask me a question like, is it good to write my essay in a rush? Let's take a quick poll and see if people think, is it good to write my essay in a rush? No, I don't think it's good to write your essay in a rush. And so take your time. I mean, if you're, and by ED2, if you're meaning like, there are a lot of ED2 schools. By the way, ED is early decision. If you're wanting to apply early decision 2, there are lots of early decision 2 schools that deadline is not like November 15th. It's like in January. So you've got plenty of time to take advantage of early decision 2 if you want to. Should the students start filling out the Common App before the course? Yeah, do it. Because why not? That'd be super awesome. Because we're not going to like go through the logistics of filling out the Common App. It's like fill out the basic info, but don't start doing the writing. What are people saying in the, oh, okay. How to ponder. Oh, okay. Folks are just chatting it up. It's hard for me to track the chat and track the questions and answer them. But fill out the Common App, but you don't need to fill in the written portions, because we're going to do all the written portions on the course, the activities list, additional info, the personal statement, the supplements. So just leave those parts blank and just fill out the basics, the rest. A couple more questions. If I don't have college counselors, how can I know what colleges look for? Join the course, Priscilla. Come on. And the reason I feel comfortable saying that to y'all is because it's pay what you can, because I'm not like selling something. Like I will help you, figure that out. So how can I know what colleges look for? I mean, broadly speaking, Priscilla, it's the skills, qualities, values, and interests that you'll be bringing with you to a college campus. I think one thing that can help too is just looking at great essays, great personal statements, so you can kind of see what the vibe is. And some of these qualities that I'm talking to you about, like core values, insight, craft, and vulnerability, in my brain, like when I look at great essays, that's kind of what makes a great personal statement. And so I don't want to say that this is what all colleges, like every single college reader is looking for, but if you can bring those things in your personal statement, you're going to be setting yourself up pretty well. How do you feel about a student writing the PS as a poem? It's hard. I mean, I read one a few months ago from another student who wrote a beautiful poem, but that student was a ridiculous, amazing poet. And it was still doing all the things that I mentioned. So just to backtrack, and this is a student who took my course last year, like she wrote this amazing poem and it had core values, it had vulnerability, insight, craft. I mean, so much craft. And I think that Graciela, and if this is the Graciela that I know, hi, but I think that it has to be just like super, super good and still be checking all those boxes. So I'm like a huge maybe to that general question. And by general, I don't mean that you're being general. I just mean it because without having seen it. Can you include a picture with an essay? It's hard. You can add it somewhere, but will they click it? I don't know. Let's see. Should I include metaphor and personification in my essay? If you want to, that sounds cool. Can you go in and work on your essay after you submit it? Yes, that was the thing I said earlier. Should we avoid talking about politics? I mean, I think it's okay, but what I want to bring you back to, whether you're talking about politics or religion, is bringing it back to the values. Like, what is the core value that's important to you? Is it what? Like, what is that thing? Because separate from should this person be vaccinated, does this person believe that vaccines are a good thing or not, which can be like political and contentious. Like, if you feel that, whatever side of it you land on, like, what were you fighting for? I mean, maybe it was just like, I was fighting to be listened to in the conversation. Like, that was what was most important to me. And then the core value is listening. And no matter what your politics are, anybody can get down with listening. So when you're thinking about those controversial topics, ask yourself, what value am I fighting for here? What's the most important thing underneath it? If you're talking about, going to your church or your temple, make sure your essay is not about trying to convert the reader to your religion. Obviously, that's not going to be it. But it's like, well, what is important to you about it? Was it the sense of community? Was it the sense of ritual? What are those universal, as it were, secular values that we can all get on board with? This is a very specific one. Which of the MIT essays is the why us essay? They took it away, Aiden. They switched it out with a why major. Now, low key, I think you kind of can do a little bit of why us details in there after your why major, because the other MIT essay, which is the describe the world you come from, is kind of a why major essay potentially. There is no technically a why us essay for the MIT ones, but kind of you could do it in the why major one. All right, last one. On the UCs. The UCs, we have this whole separate course that's also pay what you can on the UCs. UC says don't use hooks or write the PIQ like an essay. Thoughts? I agree. Should it be written like you're speaking to someone face-to-face and answering a question? Yes. Direct, straightforward. If you're talking about a community service project, this one community service project that I did with this particular organization taught me a lot. Like, that's a fine opening. So, yes, totally. You can do it as though you're talking to someone. And, I've got lots more to say that I don't have time to say today about the UCPIQs. All right. It's great to see you. Thanks for being here. I hope to see some of you on the course, of course. Again, you can get access to it right away. And I'll also continue to, I'm still releasing videos each week, once or twice a week on YouTube and on the Insta. Not on TikTok, because I don't think really people want to be doing college essay stuff on TikTok, because I don't know. There's an Instagram video that I've done that's about why me feeling like I'm showing up to a Super Bowl party with celery. Nobody wants celery at this party. Okay, that's what I got. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, y'all, and connect with you soon. Peace.